Hi, folks. Welcome back. Dennis Vitosa, also known as F Noodles. Today, we're going to be talking about a tragic incident involving actress Hayden Panettiere, who was found dead at just 36 years old. There's still not a lot of information surrounding exactly what happened, but we're going to go through what is currently available and then get into the larger story surrounding the situation. Last night, around 8 p.m., it was reported that Scream actress Hayden Panettiere had been found dead, according to TMZ. Hayden passed away earlier on Sunday. TMZ was told that she and her on and off again boyfriend had flown from Los Angeles to the South Carolina to be exact, on Saturday. Hayden is known for her roles in the Scream franchise as well as Until Dawn. She was also in Remember the Titans and several other movies throughout the years. She notably discussed the issue of postpartum depression and went viral for it many years ago, a topic that we'll touch on later this week, as there is a developing story involving Lindsay Clancy and the issues surrounding that. That said, there have been some updates to Hayden's story since the initial reports came out. TMZ published these photos showing a fire truck and multiple ambulances outside the Greenville, South Carolina residence where Hayden was staying. According to TMZ, she was found dead by a friend inside a South Carolina home. Emergency medical service workers responded to a call that came in for a person in cardiac arrest. And there is currently an open investigation into what happened. Additionally, the 911 call has been released. Here's some audio from it.
Okay, everyone, engine 2 on for cardiac arrest. Justin Millwall. Road. Okay, everyone, engine 2 on for cardiac arrest. Justin Millwall. Mr. 1, minute 29 responding.
Spawn and place of medic 29. Overdose. CPR is in progress.
Now, as you heard on that tape, there's speculation of overdose. Narcan was also found in her home. Sources close to Hayden told TMZ that she had recently been complaining about back pain over the past year, which could potentially indicate that there may have been some sort of medication involved in her death. The TMZ article speculates that she may have overdosed, as I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to speculate about that myself because there currently aren't enough facts. It usually takes some time for a coroner's report to be released, so I don't want to jump to any conclusions about what happened, but this is what TMZ has been reporting. That said, there is a video that has started floating around of Hayden during one of her last interviews from about 3 months ago, where she spoke up about something that happened to her when she was 18. During an appearance on the Shetty podcast, Hayden discussed what happened around the time she got her first major break on the show Heroes.
I was 18, even though I'd lived such a huge life and I thought I was so mature at 18. Scientifically, her frontal lobes don't develop until we're, 26, 25, 26. So even though I felt like I could make healthy decisions, safe decisions, I wasn't capable of being fully aware of what was going on around me. And it wasn't until I found myself in predicaments that I realized, my perspective completely shifted, and I realized that I was in danger. But by the time I'd realized I was in danger, I was quite literally out to sea. And it was that moment shook me and was shocking. And I was quite literally walked down, and I had been having a great time. There was no hints of anything like that happening. So it took me, I was shocked. It took me by surprise. And it was led by somebody that I had grown to trust and see as a protector and somebody who had my back. And to be walked down the stairs, and it was as like a surprise, presented as though it was like a surprise. And it was this very small room, and she physically put me in the bed next to this undressed man who was very famous and had his hands like this, like this was just, an average day for him. This is something that happens all the time. And I waited for her to leave, and I I mean, that lion in me, that fire in me, my hair stood on end, and I became ferocious. I was like, "This is not happening," but I had nowhere to hide, and I bolted, and I hid wherever I could think of to hide on a boat. On a boat. There was no jumping off and swimming away, and there was nobody who was going to. I realized that there was nobody who was going to be empathetic to my situation, that this was nothing new to them.
I mean, that sounds, it's such a horrifying event to go through and to be put in that position at 18 years old.
And disappointing when somebody lets you down like that. And I'd been let down so much before, and that when you really find somebody that you trust, like, you hold on to them for dear life, and you feel so.
Now, obviously, a lot of people are drawing a connection between Hayden dying in this manner and the interview she did with Shetty about 3 months ago, which was published back in May. Her memoir was also published in May, and the interview and the book came out about a week apart, roughly 7 days. Needless to say, there is no direct correlation between the two. There's no way to prove that because she indirectly exposed these people without mentioning names, she suddenly lost her life. To make that leap would essentially be a post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, because one event happened after another. You assume the first event caused the second event without actually having evidence establishing causation. And right now, we simply don't have that evidence. Something else noteworthy in her memoir is that Hayden reflected on spending her formative years on set. She wrote that when she was a teenager, a member of her public relations team gave her quote unquote happy pills before interviews and red carpets to help her focus. Hayden said of the experience, "I didn't ask questions and she didn't formally seek my consent, but I didn't think twice. I trusted the people I worked with, especially my team, so I popped the pills in my mouth and swallowed." She described those pills as a gateway that ushered her toward pharmaceuticals and eventually addiction. She also wrote, as I mentioned earlier, about her struggles with postpartum depression, and that a doctor had previously told her she'd be dead within 5 years if she didn't quit drinking. She was actually extremely transparent about her struggles with addiction, and at one point in her memoir even said she needed a drink to function. Now, in the midst of all of this, some people are also blaming her now ex-boyfriend Brian Hickerson, whom she accused in her memoir of allegedly physically abusing her. People are saying that the physical abuse somehow led to what ultimately happened. But again, I think we have to separate fact from fiction here. Based on what she publicly described, she seems like someone who was deeply and profoundly troubled, struggling with multiple addictions and serious instability. All that said, I can't sit here and pathologize her based solely on what she said publicly, especially considering the postpartum depression and everything else she was struggling with. But when you get caught in those kinds of destructive loops, you can end up inviting other fallen, broken people into your life, and then you end up having these sorts of experiences. Now, all that being said, where does what I call the Epstein class come into this, and why do I think her story is important? Because look at the story itself. This is someone who became extremely famous and had access to tremendous success in the entertainment industry at a very young age. At 18, yes, you're legally an adult, but you're still incredibly young to suddenly be exposed to everything she was being exposed to. And unfortunately, from the way she recounted these stories, she didn't seem to have too many adults around her in those moments, preventing her from becoming entangled in these sorts of situations. After the fact, she clearly seemed to understand that she had been completely unprepared for these reckless environments, but I think it was a bit too late by then. That said, here's the thing. There is a culture in Hollywood that allows this to happen. There's a culture of shutting up and working. You're thrown into this perpetual party culture where, as a young person, and I recognize that this may sound like I'm overgeneralizing to a certain extent, though we've heard enough stories to substantiate this argument about how young people get plucked out of anonymity, get propelled into extreme fame, thrust into these party environments, and are having their lives, their psyches, and everything about them completely destroyed, only to end up years later struggling with addiction and dying extremely early. And yes, Hayden was 36 years old. That is an extremely young death. She barely lived half of what she could have lived in her life. Arguably, she had only experienced half of her professional life. She became professionally successful when she was extremely young and was still very much working, writing a memoir and doing interviews. So for this to be the end is truly tragic and unfortunate. But this is the culture of Hollywood that has to be discussed. A lot of people seem to think that because Epstein got taken out, Weinstein got taken out, because, all these Steins got taken out, suddenly this kind of behavior doesn't happen anymore. Clearly, Hayden was talking about somebody we all know here. She didn't mention the person's name, and I have to assume there's a reason for that. But that's the reality of these environments. There's an exchange of favors, an expectation when you reach a certain level and enter certain rooms that you answer to certain people. And certain people will try to use you in certain ways if they believe they can get away with it. If they believe you won't say anything, or perhaps you'll simply just go along with it. I mean, just think about the story Hayden told. How many young women and maybe even young men could have been brought into a situation like that and simply gone along with it? As she described it, there was almost a casualness to how the situation played out. And yet, it seemed like everybody involved was comfortable except her. She didn't provide every detail. Of course, we saw this. She didn't. But from her description, it seemed like everybody else had an understanding that this was simply how things worked. And needless to say, this kind of behavior is incredibly normalized in this town. It really is. You hear about the mansion parties, about the boat parties, everything you can imagine. This is very normalized Hollywood behavior. And the reason I refer to these people as the Epstein class is because they are seemingly untouchable. These people can be extraordinarily powerful. There can be almost no accountability because they have access to other extremely powerful people. They have access to enormous amounts of money. They're tied into contracts. There's mutual liability with the companies that hire them, and those companies continue hiring them because they're able to maintain a sufficiently good public reputation to keep working, while behind the scenes, some of these people can be absolute monsters. And it becomes incredibly difficult to change that system because there is an incentive for silence. There is an incentive to keep working with these people and stay quiet because everybody is profiting. That's why we need convictions. We need public trials when there is evidence that somebody committed these sorts of crimes. We need people to actually come forward, tell these stories, name their abusers when they can substantiate those allegations. Obviously, we don't want false allegations. And allow the justice system to impose serious consequences. There cannot be a standard of accountability for multimillionaires and billionaires and another for everybody else. This aristocratic Epstein class has to understand that it is subject to the same law as a regular Joe who's buying his food at 7-Eleven or the dollar store because he can't afford to shop at Ralph's or any other grocery store chain. Wealth, fame, connections, contracts, and access to powerful people cannot become immunity from accountability. And honestly, allowing that to happen works against basic principles of fairness. If somebody is a shitty person who victimizes other people, they shouldn't keep getting rewarded. But because everybody gets tied together in these corporatized environments and develops this mutual liability, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to get rid of these people. That's exactly why actual accountability matters. And to put it bluntly, the only way to stop this culture is to start getting convictions against the people we actually know committed these crimes, this Epstein class, and to seek the death penalty. I've said this before on the H3 podcast. I believe the most heinous offenders should face the most severe punishment available under the law. And I don't think powerful people should get some special version of justice because they're multimillionaires, billionaires, celebrities, or executives with connections. There needs to be real accountability, and there need to be consequences severe enough that nobody walks into one of these situations believing they're untouchable. We need public executions when somebody is convicted of being involved in these sorts of Epstein circles. But in order to be able to get those outcomes, we need people to come forward with credible stories, evidence, get convictions, not things based on false allegations or politically motivated lawsuits. We need investigations, we need convictions, and when somebody is convicted of an Epstein-style crime or involvement of something like that, we seek the death penalty. I believe prosecutors should be aiming for something like that. This aristocratic class needs to understand that it is subject to the exact same justice as everybody else. That being said, it's truly tragic that Hayden lost her life this young. She was only 36. She could have continued having a long career. She could have had decades ahead of her to hopefully work through these issues. You have to pray for things like that. And we have to have a broader conversation about how our culture has fallen. Because when you have broken people describing experiences that have been tormenting them for years, this happened to her when she was 18. And 18 years later, she's still reliving it, writing about it in a memoir, discussing it in an interview. You have to think about how people are being stripped of their dignity by an industry that refuses any kind of spiritual accountability. We need to say what's what, and we need to show what's what, and we need to start holding people accountable. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoy this video, and share it with a friend if you think they'd enjoy it as well. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.